All right, so here's our game plan. To make this whole thing way easier, we've split the words into 4 simple groups. We'll kick things off with some positive personal qualities, then we'll dive into some tricky word pairs that always trip people up. After that, we'll cover negative feelings, and we'll wrap up with words that describe actions and things. Sound good? Let's jump in. Okay, first up, we're starting with the good stuff. Words that describe awesome people and their talents. You know, these are the kinds of qualities you see in great leaders and teammates. They're seriously fantastic words to have in your back pocket. Our first word is unassuming. So what does that mean? Imagine someone who's really good at what they do, but they don't brag about it. They're not trying to get all the attention. Think of a super successful CEO who drives a normal car and is just nice to everyone. Or, a brilliant scientist who makes huge discoveries but doesn't care about being famous. That's being unassuming. It's all about being modest and humble, even when you have every reason to show off. All right, next up we have prudent. Being prudent is basically about being wise and careful, especially when it comes to the future. You're thinking ahead to avoid problems. For example, a prudent investor is someone who does all their homework before buying stocks. And on a more personal level, putting some money aside for an emergency, that's a very prudent thing to do. It's not about being scared of everything. It's just about being smart and planning ahead.
Okay, next is courteous. This one's pretty straightforward. It just means being polite, respectful, and thoughtful towards other people. Simple things like holding a door open for someone or saying please and thank you. That's being courteous. In a work setting, if a manager really listens to what their employees have to say, that's also being courteous. It's really all about being considerate.
Let's see how these words actually work in a sentence. First, her unassuming style made her an approachable leader. See? She's humble, so people feel comfortable talking to her. Next, it is prudent to review contracts before signing them. Of course, that's just smart and careful. Then we have the manager's courteous handling of concerns improved team morale. His politeness made everyone feel better. And hey, look at this last word here, congenial. Congenial just means friendly and pleasant. So a congenial work environment is basically a great positive place where everyone gets along. Okay, moving on to section 2. And this is a big one, tricky word pairs. You know those words that look or sound almost the same but mean totally different things? Yeah, those. Getting these right is absolutely crucial for the test. So let's clear up the confusion. Let's start with a classic mix-up, ingenious versus ingenuous. Okay, for ingenious, here's a super easy way to remember it. Notice it has a G in it? Think genius. An ingenious idea is a genius idea. It's super clever and creative. Now, ingenuous is completely different. It means someone is very innocent, honest, and sincere, maybe even a little naive, like a child. So, one is about being smart, the other is about being innocent.
All right, quick pop quiz for you. A super clever solution would be? That's right, ingenious. And what about a person who is innocent and trusting? You got it, ingenuous. Perfect. It really all comes down to that spelling.
Okay, here's another pair that gets mixed up all the time, taciturn and tacit. Here's the key difference, and it's super simple. Taciturn describes a person. A taciturn person is just a quiet person, someone who doesn't say much. But tacit describes a thing, like an agreement or an understanding that isn't spoken out loud. For example, when you walk into a library, there's a tacit agreement to be quiet, right? Nobody has to say it, you just know. That's a tacit understanding. Let's look at some examples to really lock this in. First, his taciturn nature made it hard to know what he was thinking. See? Taciturn is describing him, the person. He's quiet. Now the second one, there was a tacit agreement to cooperate on the project. Here, tacit describes the agreement, the unspoken deal they had. That really shows you the difference, doesn't it? All right, time to shift gears for our third section. We're going to dive into words that describe negative feelings in tough situations. Now, these might not be the happiest words, but knowing them will make your description so much more powerful and precise. To make these words stick, let's follow a little story, kind of like a downward spiral. So, step 1. A massive new challenge appears, and it might daunt you. That means you feel really intimidated, a bit scared. Then, if that feeling hangs around, you might fall into lethargy. You just have zero energy, no motivation to do anything. You feel totally drained. From there, that feeling can sink into melancholy, which is this deep, lingering sadness. And finally, if things feel really, really unfair, all that sadness might just erupt into wrath. We're talking intense, furious anger. And speaking of intense anger, let's look at this word, fulminate. To fulminate against something means you are protesting against it loudly, with a ton of anger. Think of it like an explosion of words. So in this example, the opposition leader isn't just saying, "I disagree." No way. He's passionately and angrily attacking the reforms. Our next word is stupor. A stupor is basically a dazed and confused state where you can't really think or react properly. It's often caused by shock, or maybe being really sick or just completely exhausted. Like, imagine someone hears some terrible news and just sits there, staring into space, unable to say anything. They're in a stupor. Or, you know that feeling after you finish a really, really long and hard exam, and your brain just feels like mush? That's kind of like a stupor, too.
Okay, this is a super important one to get right. The difference between famous and infamous. It's simple, really. Famous is for good things. You can have a famous actor or a famous inventor. But infamous is always for bad things. So you'd have an infamous criminal or an infamous historical disaster. If you see the word infamous, just remember, it means famous for something terrible.
All right, we're on to our final section. Here, we're going to cover some really useful words for describing what people do and the things we see around us. Words for actions, decisions, and all sorts of items. Let's finish strong. Let's break down these 3 action words. First up, inscribe. This just means to write or carve something on a surface so it stays there, like inscribing your name on an award. Pretty simple. Next, embellish. This one has 2 cool meanings. You can embellish an object, like decorating a plain box to make it beautiful, or you can embellish a story, which means you add extra, maybe not so true details to make it sound more exciting. And finally, lavish. This can be a verb or an adjective. If you lavish praise on someone, you're giving them tons of praise, very generously. And if you go to a lavish party, it means the party is super fancy and expensive. Okay, unilateral. This is a really common word in business and politics. The trick to remembering it is the prefix, uni, which means one. Think of a unicycle, one wheel. So a unilateral decision is a one-sided decision. It's made by just one person or one group without asking anyone else. For example, if your boss changes the whole team's schedule without talking to any of you first, that was a unilateral decision. Or when a country decides to do something all by itself, without its partners, that's unilateral action.
Next, we have adamant. When someone is adamant, they are completely, totally unwilling to change their mind. Their decision is final. A great way to remember this is to think of the word diamond. A diamond is super hard, right? Unbreakable. Well, if a person is adamant, their opinion is just like a diamond. It's not going to change. For instance, you could say, he was adamant that they were going in the wrong direction.
And our last word for today is sundry. This is just a slightly more formal way of saying various or miscellaneous. It just means a mix of different things that aren't really related. You might talk about the sundry items in a drawer, a random collection of pens, paper clips, and buttons. Or in a budget, you might have a category for sundry expenses to cover all the little different costs.
And there you have it. Can you believe it? You've just gone through over 25 new words.